John thought he had it figured out. He was 55 and his 401k had just crossed $600,000. Every raise for 30 years, he bumped his contribution. Every single April, he felt a little safer. Max the 401k, never stop. That was the rule. And John followed that rule like it was scripture. Then a fee-only planner ran his real numbers out to age 90. And the planner went quiet for a second, just staring at the screen. Because the math said something John had never once considered. Continuing to do the responsible thing, maxing out for 10 more years, was going to cost his household about $340,000. Not in fees. Not in some market crash he couldn't control. In taxes. Taxes he was volunteering to pay on purpose, one paycheck at a time. This is the number almost nobody runs until it is far too late to fix. And once you actually see it, you cannot unsee it. So let's run it together, slowly, on your money. Now, before you close this video and call me reckless, let me be very clear. I am not telling you to stop saving. Saving is the whole game, and John was great at it. I am telling you that where you save changes everything about what you actually keep. There is a difference between the money you save and the money you get to spend. And for a certain kind of person, a disciplined, high-earning, lifelong saver, that gap can quietly swallow a small fortune. John did everything the internet told him to do. He maxed the account. He never touched it. He ignored the noise and stayed the course through every crash. And that discipline built a beautiful pre-tax balance that is now a slow-motion tax problem heading straight for his 70s. Here is the part that stings the most. The IRS already owns a piece of that $600,000. John just hasn't been told how big the piece is yet. Most people picture retirement as the finish line, the moment the taxes finally stop. For a big pre-tax saver, retirement is the moment the tax bill actually arrives. And it arrives with interest. So before you dismiss this idea, hear this out. The exact rule that built John's wealth is the same rule that's about to tax the most of it away. Let me give you the full picture, because the details are where this actually lives. John is 55 years old, married, and earns $160,000 a year. He is a senior operations manager, the steady kind of guy the whole company relies on. He has $600,000 sitting in a traditional pre-tax 401k. His plan, the plan he is genuinely proud of, is simple. Work 10 more years, keep maxing the account, and retire at 65. And in 2026, maxing it out is no small amount of money. The base employee limit this year is $24,500. Because he is over 50, he can stack an $8,000 catch-up on top of that. That is $32,500 a year of his own money, before his employer adds a cent. His company matches dollar for dollar up to the first chunk of his salary, which drops in roughly another $8,000. So call it $40,000 a year flowing into that pre-tax account like clockwork. John looks at that number and sees a fortress being built, brick by brick. And in one narrow sense, he is completely right. The balance is going to be enormous. That is exactly the problem, because John has never asked the second question. Not how big will this account get, but who gets paid when I finally open it. Now, meet the fork in the road. There are two versions of the next 35 years of John's life, and they start on the same morning. In the first version, John keeps doing precisely what he's doing. He maxes the pre-tax 401k every year until the day he retires. In the second version, John changes exactly one thing at 55. He keeps contributing just enough to capture the full employer match. Every dollar of it, always. No exceptions. But the extra money, the money above the match, he stops funneling into the pre-tax account. He redirects it instead. Same income, same savings rate, same iron discipline. The only thing that changes is the tax bucket the money lands in. Two Johns, identical in every measurable way but one quiet decision. In the keep maxing version, that account can balloon past $2.5 million by his mid-70s. In the second version, the pre-tax bucket stays smaller on purpose, and a mountain of tax-free money grows beside it. And the distance between those two men, measured across a full retirement, comes out to about $340,000. Same person, same effort, one decision. Let's keep this fair and let's run the numbers. Here's how John even got here, because the backstory matters. He started at 25, putting in 3% just to grab the match. By 35, he was at 10%. By 45, he was maxing it out, and he never once looked back. 30 years of raises, 30 years of automatic contributions, 30 years of calmly ignoring the headlines. That single habit is the reason he has $600,000 while half his coworkers have almost nothing saved. So let me be crystal clear. The saving was never the mistake. The saving was heroic. The mistake is the part that comes next, the part nobody ever coached him on. Because John spent 3 decades optimizing the deposit and 0 seconds optimizing the withdrawal. He knows his contribution rate to the decimal point. He has no earthly idea what his tax rate will be at 76. And that second number is the one that quietly decides how much of this fortress he actually keeps. Picture the two paths as two buckets sitting on a table. The first bucket, the pre-tax one, is enormous and nearly full, but the IRS gets to reach in every single year and take a scoop, on their schedule, at their chosen rate. The second bucket is split three ways, some pre-tax, some Roth, some plain taxable. It holds the exact same water, but this time John controls the tap. And in retirement, control of the tap is worth far more than the size of the bucket. Start with the one fact that quietly reframes everything else. A traditional 401k is not a gift. It is a loan you take from your own future. When John contributes and skips the tax today, the government does not forgive that tax. It simply agrees to wait for it. And here's what nobody tells you about that wait. The IRS is not a patient partner who eventually forgets. Every single dollar in that pre-tax account has an invisible co-owner, and that co-owner gets to set the tax rate later, not you. John thinks he owns $600,000. In reality, he owns maybe 70% of it, and the government silently owns the rest. At his bracket, that is well over $100,000 that was never really his. The deduction he loved every April was never free money at all. It was an interest-free loan slowly turning into a bill, and the bill grows right alongside his investments. Now here's the belief that traps good savers. Most people assume their tax rate in retirement will be lower than it is today. For an average saver, that is often perfectly true. For a great saver like John, it is frequently painfully false. Why? Because a giant pre-tax balance does not sit quietly and wait to be spent on your schedule. Eventually, the law reaches in and forces it out the door, whether John wants the money that year or not. That force has a name, and for John, it arrives at age 75. It's called a required minimum distribution, an RMD, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Starting the year John turns 75, the IRS makes him withdraw a set slice of that account every year. He does not get to say no. He does not get to say, I don't need it this year, leave it alone. The size of that forced withdrawal is dictated by a government table, and it is not a rounding error. Let's put real numbers on it, because this is where people wake up. At 75, the IRS divisor is 24.6. That means John is forced to pull nearly 4% of the entire balance in year one. Remember, in the keep maxing version, this account didn't stop at $600,000. 10 more years of $40,000 contributions, plus another decade of compounding, can push it past $2.5 million by 75. So watch the first forced withdrawal. $2.5 million divided by 24.6 is over $100,000, yanked out in a single year and taxed as ordinary income. And here's the truly cruel part. That percentage does not stay flat. It climbs every year you age. The divisor shrinks. By 80, it's around 20. By 85, it's smaller still. So the forced withdrawals actually get larger as a share of the account, right as John has the least use for the money. The better his investments performed, the bigger the withdrawal and the bigger the tax bill. His success became the trap. And miss one of these distributions? The penalty is 25% of the amount he failed to take. The IRS does not treat this as a suggestion. Let's kill the most expensive assumption in all of retirement planning. The belief that your tax rate automatically drops the moment the paychecks stop. For John, add it up honestly. A forced withdrawal north of $100,000. A pension if he has one. 2 Social Security checks, most of it now taxable. Interest and dividends thrown off by decades of careful saving. Stack all of that together, and John's taxable income in his late 70s can rival what he earned at the peak of his entire career. Except now the standard deduction is his only real shelter. The mortgage interest is long gone. The kids stopped being dependents 20 years ago. Fewer deductions, nearly the same income, and a tax code that never once stopped moving. It is entirely possible to retire into a higher effective tax rate than you ever paid while working a single day. And that is not some freak edge case for a disciplined saver. For John, on the keep maxing path, it is simply the base case. The deduction he happily banked at 55, he pays back in full at 76, plus the torpedo, plus IRMAA, plus interest. He never actually avoided the tax. He just scheduled it at the worst possible time at a rate somebody else gets to pick. Now, most people hear forced withdrawal and shrug. Fine, they think, I'll just pay the tax on it. But the RMD never arrives alone. It drags 2 other taxes into the room with it. And this is where the real damage quietly hides. The first passenger is the Social Security tax torpedo. Here's what almost no one understands about Social Security. How much of your benefit gets taxed depends entirely on your other income. The IRS runs a formula using something called provisional income. As John's forced withdrawals pile on top of his benefits, more and more of the Social Security itself becomes taxable, until up to 85% of it is exposed to tax. So the RMD isn't taxed just once. It reaches over and makes his Social Security taxable too. One extra dollar of withdrawal can add far more than a single dollar to his taxable income. Planners call this a stealth marginal rate, and inside the torpedo zone, it can climb past 22% on income. That looks like it should be taxed at 12, and it quietly worsens with time. Those Social Security thresholds have been frozen since the 1980s and 1990s. They do not rise with inflation, not by a dollar. So every single year, the torpedo silently pulls in more retirees who never saw it coming. Then comes the second passenger, and this one has a cliff. It's called IRMAA, the Income-Related Monthly Adjustment Amount, and it is a surcharge bolted onto your Medicare premiums. Here's the trap inside the trap. Medicare looks at your income from 2 years earlier to set today's premiums. So those big withdrawals John takes in his 70s quietly reach back in time and inflate his Medicare bills. In 2026, once a married couple's income crosses $218,000, the surcharges switch on. The standard Part B premium is about $203 a month. At the top tier, it balloons to nearly $690 a month. And that's per person, so double it for a couple. And IRMAA is a cliff, not a gentle ramp. Go $1 over a bracket line and your premiums can jump more than $1,000 for the entire year. So John's forced distribution doesn't just get taxed and doesn't just tax his Social Security. It can shove him straight off an IRMAA cliff and pile thousands in Medicare surcharges on top. 3 separate taxes, all detonated by one withdrawal he never asked to take. And now, the trap that almost no one on the internet will tell you about. Because it isn't fun to say out loud. It's called the widow's penalty. John is married, and married couples get generous tax brackets and higher thresholds. But one day, one spouse passes first. That is simply life. The survivor keeps living, keeps needing income, and keeps facing nearly the same required withdrawals. But the very next year, they file as a single taxpayer. The brackets nearly cut in half. The Social Security thresholds drop. The IRMAA limits drop. Same big pre-tax account, same forced RMDs, but now squeezed through a single person's tax code. It is one of the most brutal, least discussed tax events in all of retirement, and a massive pre-tax balance makes it dramatically worse. The keep-maxing version of John's life doesn't just tax him. It leaves that tax trap sitting in the lap of the person he loves most. So what on earth did the second John do differently? He used the 10 years almost everyone throws away. Between the day John stops working and the year forced withdrawals begin, there is a window. For John, retiring at 65 with RMDs starting at 75, that window is a full 10 years wide. Those are the cheapest tax years a high earner will ever get in his entire life. His paycheck is gone. His Social Security may not have started yet, especially if he waits to claim. His tax brackets are suddenly wide open and mostly empty. The first John lets those years sit idle and then gets ambushed at 75. The second John treats that window like the gift it is. Every year, he deliberately moves money out of the pre-tax account and into a Roth. A Roth conversion, paying the tax on his own terms while the rates are low and the brackets are empty. He carefully fills up the 12 and 22% brackets on purpose, then stops right before he'd trip an IRMAA surcharge. He is draining the tax bomb one measured bucket at a time, years before the law can force his hand. And there's a tool that makes the early version of this even smoother. It's called the Rule of 55. If you leave your job in the calendar year you turn 55, or later, you can pull money from that specific employer's 401k with no 10% early withdrawal penalty at all. Fewer than a third of eligible people ever use it. The second John uses every legal tool on the table. So when I say John redirects the money above the match, where does it actually land? He has 4 good doors, and most people don't even know 3 of them exist. Door 1 is the Roth 401k, which more and more plans now offer right beside the traditional one. Same paycheck deduction, same limit, but he pays the tax now and every dollar grows completely tax-free after that. Door 2 is a Roth IRA or a backdoor Roth if his income is too high to contribute directly. That's several thousand more each year, catch-up included, into the tax-free bucket. Door 3 is a health savings account if he's on the right plan, and it may be the single best deal in the entire tax code. It goes in tax-free, grows tax-free, and comes out tax-free for medical costs. Door 4 is a plain taxable brokerage account, which sounds boring right up until you see the mechanics. It has no forced withdrawals, ever. It's taxed at lower long-term capital gains rates, not ordinary income. And when John passes, his heirs receive a step up in basis that can erase the gains entirely. So the redirect was never a downgrade. It's the same dollars, spread across buckets the IRS treats in wildly different ways. John's problem was never too little money. It was far too little variety. And let's make the gap year move concrete, because do a Roth conversion sounds abstract until you actually watch it work. The second John retires at 65 with no paycheck and hasn't yet claimed Social Security. His taxable income that year is close to zero, so he converts deliberately right up to the top of the 22% bracket, moving a healthy chunk from pre-tax to Roth and paying tax at a rate that he chose. Then he does it again the next year and the next for 10 straight years, quietly shrinking the pre-tax balance before an RMD can ever touch it. By 75, the account the government forces him to tap is a fraction of what the first John is sitting on. His required withdrawal is small and manageable. His Social Security stays mostly untaxed. He glides underneath the IRMAA cliffs instead of slamming into them at full speed. He paid some tax early, yes, but at 12 and 22% in years he controlled, instead of 32% in years the IRS controlled. That is the entire game compressed into one sentence. Pay a known low rate on your terms, or an unknown higher rate on theirs. By the time both Johns reach 75, they barely resemble each other. The first John sits on a monstrous pre-tax balance with a forced six-figure withdrawal every year, torpedoing his Social Security and climbing IRMAA cliffs deep into his 80s. The second John holds a much smaller pre-tax balance, a modest required distribution, a large pile of tax-free Roth money he can tap in any amount without a tax hit, and a Social Security check that stays mostly protected. Same career income, same savings rate, same market returns, dollar for dollar. The only real difference was the bucket and the timing. And when you total the extra income taxes, the extra Social Security taxes, and the extra Medicare surcharges the first John pays across a 25-year retirement, the gap settles right around $340,000. That is not money lost in a crash he couldn't predict. It is money he handed over cheerfully because he kept doing the single thing everyone told him was always right. Now, there is a real case for the other side, and honesty demands I make it as well as its own defenders would. Maxing pre-tax hands you a deduction today at your highest marginal rate, which is genuinely valuable, especially for a high earner. If you'll retire to a state with no income tax, or you truly will spend down into the low brackets, a traditional 401k can absolutely win the math. And nobody actually knows what future tax law will look like. Rates today are historically low, and Roth is a bet that they simply won't stay that way. This is not a religion. It is a math problem whose answer depends on your inputs, your balance, and your life. The point was never that pre-tax is bad. The point is that blindly maxing it with zero plan for the back end is a decision most people make entirely by accident. And here's the 2026 twist John never saw coming. The law itself just started shoving high earners toward Roth. Under a new Secure 2.0 rule that took effect this past January, if you earned more than $150,000 last year, your catch-up contributions are now required to go into a Roth. John earns $160, so part of this shift isn't even his choice anymore. Washington already decided the old game was a little too generous. But here's the part that almost every video on this topic gets dangerously, recklessly wrong. And I need you to really hear this one before you do anything at all. This entire strategy, stop maxing, redirect the extra, convert during the gap years, only helps one very specific kind of person. It helps the great saver who already has a large pre-tax balance. If that is not you yet, this exact advice can quietly hurt you. So look at the real numbers, not the fantasy. The average 401k balance for someone aged 55 to 64 is about $272,000. But the average is a liar here, dragged upward by a handful of quiet millionaires. The median, the true middle, the typical person, is only around $84,700. That means half of all savers near retirement have less than $85,000 to their name. For that person, there is no tax bomb coming down the road. There is a savings shortfall coming instead. And the single worst thing they could do is watch a video with the word stop in the title and actually stop. If you are behind, John's RMD problem is a problem you would feel lucky to have someday. Think for a moment about what that actually means. For most people watching this, the real enemy was never a future tax bill. It's starting too late, saving too little, or bailing out the second the market drops. Those are the true wealth killers. And a video titled "Stop Contributing" quietly pours gasoline on all three. The tax problem is a graduation present. You have to build the wealth first before you ever earn the right to worry about protecting it. Take Maya for a second. Maya is 28, earns $52,000, and has maybe $14,000 in her 401k. For Maya, stopping would be pure financial malpractice. She should be flooring the accelerator. Every raise, every match, every single year, because compounding needs decades and Maya still has them. The stop advice would quietly rob her of the exact fortune it's trying to protect John from. So let me draw the line as clearly as I possibly can. If your 401k is not on track to clear roughly $1 million by your 70s, this entire video does not apply to you. Keep contributing. Grab every last dollar of that employer match, because it's an instant return you cannot beat anywhere else on earth. Build the problem first. You can afford to solve the good kind of tax problem later. The people online shouting, "Stop contributing," are handing a correct answer to the wrong audience and calling it wisdom. And this is the one line I want you to carry out of here. A 401k isn't a tax break. It's a tax bill you agreed to pay later, and you don't get to pick the rate. John's real mistake was never that he saved too much money. His mistake was believing that one rule could be right for his entire life, at every balance, in every bracket, forever. So what do you actually do with all of this? You stop treating Max the 401k as a sacred commandment and start treating it as one tool among several. Always take the full match. That part is never wrong. It's free money and an instant return you can't beat anywhere on earth. Beyond the match, ask where you honestly already are. If your pre-tax balance is still small, keep feeding it and don't overthink a single thing. If it's large and growing fast, start diversifying the bucket. Some Roth, some taxable, some tax-free. So future you inherits choices instead of a forced bill and an IRMAA cliff. And somewhere in your 50s, run the numbers all the way out to 90, not just to your retirement party. Because the most expensive mistakes in personal finance are almost never dramatic. They are quiet, reasonable-sounding rules you follow for 30 years without ever once checking whether they still fit the person. You have become. John's fortress was real, and it was genuinely impressive. He just never asked who was going to live in it, or how much the landlord would quietly charge at the door. The most important financial decision you will ever make is knowing the difference between a strategy that's right for you and a strategy that's right for someone else entirely. So do the math on your own life, with your own numbers, at your own balance. Make the decision that matches your reality, not someone else's sales pitch. And if this showed you something about your money that nobody had ever bothered to tell you, subscribe to Desmond Wealth and turn on the notification bell. We break down the hidden math behind the financial decisions you face every single day.